You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome, everyone, to the 20th episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we dig deep with cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers in order to give you that 1% you need to keep pushing forward. My guest on the show today is Miss Annie Poole.
Miss Poole was diagnosed with endometrial cancer at 49 years old. She lives in British Columbia, and she is an author, a speaker, and a coach. She's also the founder of the Adventure Principle, which is a 3-step process that cancer patients can use to transform their challenges with chemo, radiation, and surgery into an adventure. Annie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Truett. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. So Annie and I met through a mutual support group. She had a friend who was a part of a support group and reached out to me and said, hey, I've got a great friend who would be an awesome guest on your show. And she told me a little bit about Annie. And I spoke, and after speaking to you, I just knew that you had to be a guest on the show just based off all of your previous experiences. And, you know, I absolutely love the 3-step process that you have out now. And I've had a chance to check out your book, Passport to Life. You can find it on Amazon.com and, you know, read several snippets from it and just go over the basics of what you have to say and your story and just how you bring it all together and give people a different approach and perspective to going through all the challenges that we face when it comes down to, you know, this disease called cancer. So I'm excited to talk to you today. And let's start off the show with you telling everyone, why do you feel like it's important for you to share your story with our listeners?
Well, first of all, Truett, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast today, because it's a real honor. And what I really want to share with your listeners today is the fact that we've heard a certain language around a diagnosis of cancer. And that language is detrimental to most people. And that is this language that we use about fighting a battle with cancer. And so the biggest thing that I want people to take away from listening to this podcast today is to just shift their perspective and be open to thinking about a cancer diagnosis in a different way.
No, I love that. I think everyone goes into, you know, after you get the shock of the words cancer, into their own little narrative. So I love the way you can teach people to not go down the death and the fight route, but more into shifting into the acceptance and really taking this on as a, you know, to use some words from your book, as an adventure in life. So I think that's amazing. Is there one takeaway that you hope the listeners receive from your specific story?
Yeah, that takeaway would be, well, I don't discount the fact that a cancer diagnosis is extremely challenging, but the one takeaway is, like I said, to be open to a different perspective, to use the power of your imagination to transform this journey of cancer. And once you learn how to do that, the rest of the process will be so much easier. And I'll be able to share a little bit more about that, you know, throughout the podcast.
I love it. So tell us a little bit about your life prior to your diagnosis. What was I know we spoke a little bit about your occupation, your family life, your overall health. Like, what was your life like prior to receiving those words you have cancer?
Well, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I had been married for 24 years, but I have to say it was a troubled marriage. And there was something from our past, my former husband and myself. There was something in our past that took place early on in our marriage. And for myself, I just couldn't get past it. And I can't tell you what that incident was, because I talk more about that in the book, and I don't want to spoil that part for those who might want to read it. But that incident was something that I tried to push down for the duration of our marriage. And I figured I could just live as though that piece never happened. And there was a point just before I left the marriage where all of this stuff was coming up, and I knew I had to deal with it. And the only way I could think of dealing it was to leave, because I was feeling unsupported in that area. But the unfortunate thing was that, in order to make a way for myself as a single woman now, on her own, a former stay-at-home mom, I felt I had to push that down again just to carry on and make a way for myself. So I was on my way to pursuing a dream. And the dream was to become all those things I wanted to become that I hadn't had the chance to do when I was married. And one of those things was to live a life of travel and to write a book. So I was really on my way to pursue a dream, but simultaneously also pushing down something that was really, really important for me to address. And so to my detriment, I figured I could just carry on. And those were the circumstances that were leading up to a cancer diagnosis.
So you're having trouble with your marriage. You had some things going on, a specific thing going on that I know you talk about in your book. And you said you just kind of just were pushing it down, which is what which I say most of us do sometimes when it comes down to addressing the things that hurt us the most. It's easy. I think as human beings, we usually take the path of less friction. So it's a lot less friction to address the things that are really deep going on inside of you. And it's easy to let a day go by, a week, a month, a year, and next thing you know, it's been several years and you still got this burning issue that we haven't dealt with and everything. And I know that's something you were battling, and you kind of got out of all that and you were looking to get out and write a book and travel and everything. And then all of a sudden life kind of changes for you. Can you share like the moments that led right up to the day that you were diagnosed?
Yeah, well, I could share a few months prior, because I felt I was on my way to realizing those dreams that I had been pursuing. And so a few months prior, I had taken my son and daughter on a site inspection tour to Italy and Ireland. And we were there for a couple of weeks. It was a magical experience. And we were there because we wanted to put together life-changing tours for people, in particular in those two places, Italy and Ireland. And, there were also physical signs that were taking place in my body at the same time during that trip. But again, I just pushed through it. And those physical signs were, I was bleeding very heavily, but I figured it was just menopause, and even other friends were saying, "Are you sure? You sure this is normal? Because, I'm a little worried about you." So, once we got back to Victoria, where we lived, then, I was still moving forward with those plans, and we were getting ready for a big launch of this company that we started. And the launch was going to be like local experiences here in Victoria. And so the day that I found out that I was diagnosed with cancer was the day that we were launching this big experience, the local tours in the city. And so after I heard the news on the phone, I hung up and put on my coat and walked out, and I had to address each one of the business owners that were involved on this tour that we were providing for people. And I had to go to each one of them and say, I'm sorry, we can't participate in these plans that we had because I have cancer. And so I had to do that with, I think, about 15 businesses. And then after I was done with that, then I went back to my condo, and then my kids came over, and then I had to explain to them the news that I had just received. So in a way, it was a bit of a relief, if you can appreciate that, because this launch was a big thing that was weighing heavily on each one of us. And then at the same time, it was a shock, to have to shift our direction and put our focus in something completely different that we weren't expecting.
What kind of reactions did you get from the business owners and from your children when you told them that you had cancer?
They were all really lovely. Yeah. One in particular really left an impression on me, because I would say that was the perfect way to deal with someone who has a cancer diagnosis. And she just looked at me and she says, "I'm not worried about you. I know you'll be fine." And for me, I really appreciated that, because she demonstrated to me that she had complete confidence in my ability to handle this in the best way.
Why do you think that was so important for you to hear that at that moment?
Because I had the opposite experience from some friends who, would come over and just crumble in a pool of tears and just say, "I'm so worried about you. I don't know if you're going to be okay." And for me, that just made me angry, because, they were my friends, and I wanted them to believe that I had the ability to handle this. Like I needed people to have that confidence in me, because it could wax and wane, as you well know yourself.
I think lots of times we borrow emotions from people, and the people that are closest to you, if they are confident and happy and excited and, pushing you to do good things in your life and are motivational and everything, we tend to borrow from that. And the same thing with the opposite as well, too. If we have people in our lives that, some people react different ways, because I think lots of times their emotions of thinking that, you're going to pass away supersedes, like they think about how they feel versus how you feel. So they tend to go in that, they want to ask you questions to help you make them feel better, when it should be the exact opposite. And so, when people are talking to you and everything, I think what you said about being able to give you the confidence that you needed, because some days you feel great and you think you can just beat this and all these other things and all the other adjectives people like to put out there for this. And then other days you just feel terrible. So you need that little bit of support to kind of move through that. As you were, started, telling everyone, and, you started the treatment side of everything. Like, as far as I know, your treatment I guess plan was a little bit different than everyone else's. Tell us a little bit about like what the doctor told you and then what you decided to do once you got all the news about cancer and endometrial cancer.
Yeah. Well, I was told, from the outset that because I just grilled the oncologist with questions, how long is this going to take? What kind of treatment am I going to have? And the answer that I got back was, it could take up to 2 years. And as things got closer to a more concrete diagnosis, then the exact treatment was spelled out. And that was, I was going to have surgery. It was intensive surgery, and 6 to 9 cycles of chemo and 45 to 60 cycles of radiation. So the duration of this treatment could be up to 2 years. And because I was an entrepreneur and because I had no insurance, I had just purchased a condo, like all of this was a really big concern for me because, I had no regular money, no funds coming in. And if I were to take 2 years off without anything coming in, well, I'd be on the street.
Right.
That's what I could see for myself. So it wasn't just my health that I was worried about. It was also my financial situation as well. And then being single and not having a partner to support me. And I also had my 2 adult kids who really probably needed me more than I needed them. But we both we all supported each other at that time. But I knew how vulnerable they were as well, having gone through a marriage breakup and then to see their mother struggle with this health challenge.
So you had a decision to make. You have all this, and I totally understand the whole entrepreneurial thing as well too. When it's great, and then it's also the wildest ride you'll ever be on to be an entrepreneur.
Oh, absolutely.
To say the least. But the insurance thing, that was something big for me as well too. And I decided to leave the corporate world and become an entrepreneur. That's one of those things that you think about, but then you're like, well, you kind of try to get away with it a little bit, but then all of a sudden, boom, this happens. And, this is probably the time in your life where you probably needed insurance the most besides like having children and stuff. So you're faced with these decisions. You don't have any health insurance. What did you do next?
Well, I guess I would have to explain that in the context of, or leading up to the second, more conclusive diagnosis. And that would be that moment then when I was scheduled for surgery. And prior to surgery, I just had, I don't know if it was denial or just a super optimistic attitude. I would venture probably more so on the side of denial. But I just kept saying to myself, I'm going to have surgery and then it's just going to be all gone. I'm going to be done and I can get on with my life again. So leading up to surgery, I was just super optimistic, and I can recall the day that my kids drove me to the hospital and what song was playing on the radio and just how I parted ways with them in kind of a happy-go-lucky way. And then I'm wheeled into the operating room. And my next moment that I remember is I'm still groggy. I'm barely coming to. But as I'm opening up my eyes, I can see that there's someone standing over my bed. And I look a little closer, and it's my oncologist. And again, I'm just coming to, like, this is post-surgery. But in my mind, I'm thinking, she must be there because she's got some really good news to tell me. However, she's got her hands folded or her arms folded. And she begins to speak. And she says to me, "Your surgery was successful. And I removed the tumor in your abdomen. But your cancer has spread to the lymph and the upper aorta." And then she spoke the words that just rocked me to my core. And those words were, "And it's incurable." And she looked at me with the kind of look that would probe right through you. And I met her gaze with the same intensity. And so I said to her, "Can you please repeat that?" Because I could barely believe what she had to say, or that she had the nerve to say that to me, in such a vulnerable condition. And without skipping a beat, she repeated, "Yes, it's incurable." And that with that, she turned on her heels and walked out of the room. And I don't know if it's polite to tell you what my first thought was, because it's a swear word. But this feeling just welled up inside me, and it was this giant, "Fuck you." "Fuck you. You don't get to tell me when I'm going to die. And fuck you. You just wait and see. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to die. I'm going to live, and I'm going to blow your mind with how I'm going to live." And that was my first thought. And I think within minutes, I called for a nurse, and I said, "Can you please bring me a piece of paper and a pen?" And she came back with both those things, and I just started to write, because that was a turning point moment for me. And what I started to write on that piece of paper was a long list, a long list of what my life was going to look like, how I was going to live it, and all the different experiences that I was going to enjoy. And then when I was finished, I didn't know how the hell I was going to live this, because here I am flat on my back, lying on a hospital bed, and could barely get up to use the bathroom. But here I'm going to pull off this long list of amazing things I'm going to do.
That's such an entrepreneur thing. Whenever we get told no, or like anything like that, like we're all like, "No, you're not going to tell me no." And it's funny because I think we assume that everybody's like that, but that's totally not true. But that just kind of goes to show you like the type of guts it takes to, number one, be an entrepreneur is huge. And then, to look this diagnosis and this doctor, what she just told you, and turn around and walked off, and to look at your body and say, no, that's not, incurable is not me. Like, you're not taking on the identity. And, and again, we all go through the denial stage, like, it's not going to get me, kind of situation. But I mean, I truly feel that the way if you think a certain way in your head about something very specifically, your body will physically try to react to make that happen. There's a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And that's one of the main premises of the book is you think a certain way and your body physically responds to try to make that happen. And, it's just a constant reminder every day that you're not going to be a certain way, or, this isn't going to happen to me. And, not to say that you can think your way completely out of every cancer diagnosis for people listening. I know that's not always the case, with some people. Everybody wants to fight and argue and a little bit about that and stuff. But in this certain circumstance, that's what it took for you to just take that first step to kind of start preparing your life, preparing yourself, and preparing the next decisions that you were going to make that were really tough, to move forward with, claiming this onto your body and deciding how you were going to actually manage your own health. So after you made your list of things that you wanted to accomplish and things that you wanted to do, tell us a little bit more about this, what decisions you made when it came down to, your treatment plan and everything going forward.
Yeah. Well, what that list gave me was a focus, so many times when people are going through a cancer diagnosis, they are told, well, you just have to be positive, have faith, just pray, any one of those things. And that's all well and good. But, when I think about myself, what did I have to be positive about? Had no financial backing, was on the verge of bankruptcy, on the verge of exiting the world. When I looked at my situation realistically, there was nothing to be positive about. But that list that I wrote out, that's what I could be positive about. That's what made my soul sing. So to go back to your question then I could frame my treatment in relation to this list that I had made. So for me, I just kind of intuitively sensed that, okay, I can take the doctor's advice for my treatment with a grain of salt, because I know my body better than they do, and one of my biggest fears was that by the end of this treatment that they prescribed, I would just be like an empty shell of the former person that I was, so lifeless and listless that, I'd be barely recognizable. So that was my greatest fear. And to me, then I could just see that all I would need is 3 rounds of chemo moving forward. And then I would do my own thing, to keep my positivity high, and also to release the emotional trauma that had been accumulated inside me for 30 years. So
tell us about your chemo experience.
Well, that's when I discovered what I now call the adventure principle, because I looked at my oncologist's recommendation in a different way. She said, 2 years, you can't do anything. You'll have to go through all this treatment. So I thought, if other people were given 2 years of time off, they would celebrate, because that's like an extended vacation. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to work. They just have to concentrate on their health. So I decided to look at that time off in a different way, and just try to figure out a way that I could tap into what were the most pinnacle moments in my life. And those were the moments when I traveled. And I knew I had to keep those wonderful feelings alive inside me, because somehow that was going to be really beneficial for me. So then I chose to just act in kind of counterintuitive to what most people would do. Most people would choose to see this thing as a battle and hunker down and grit their teeth, kind of get into survival mode. But I had done that for most of my life, push through circumstances. I didn't have the strength, or I didn't have what it took anymore to live my life in that way. I was completely finished. So I chose to act in a different way. And that really surprised me as to how well it worked. So I chose to then embrace this idea of time off with cancer as, okay, it's my cancer vacation, or my cancer journey, or my cancer adventure.
So as you're getting chemo and stuff, tell us maybe about one of the adventures that you went on in your head while you were going through all this.
Well, I knew that the one resource that I had, I didn't have my health, I didn't have my financial wealth, but the one resource that I did have was my mind, or my imagination. So every time I had chemo, I would close my eyes and just picture that, the seat I was sitting on in the chemo room, which, by the way, if you've ever been through chemo, is a big cushy chair. You can push a couple of buttons and recline. It's got a cup holder. I would just picture that chair was a first-class seat on an airplane, because it kind of looks like that. And then I would imagine that the nurse who was coming over with the blanket and the fuzzy slippers, she was actually my flight attendant, who, if you're on first class, that's what they usually do, is they come over and give you a blanket and a pair of fuzzy slippers. And then she'd hook me up with a chemo cocktail, but it could be my cocktail on the airplane. Mm-hmm. So that's how I chose to see it, that, cancer was going to be the chemo was going to be the very thing that would take me closer to my dreams of traveling the world. And what unfolded from that is, when I look back, it's hard to be aware of it at the time, but when I look back, those days in the chemo room were actually really pleasant, even though I had some very intense, toxic treatments of chemo that took, 8 or 9 hours to administer. Well, the after effects of that was that I never had any pains in my body. I never had any nausea. I still maintained good energy, and sometimes I even went out social dancing afterwards.
Was it at those moments, as you went through all the chemo, where you developed that 3-step process, where you kind of imagined it and kind of went through it each time as you decided to go, went through each treatment?
Well, it was something that I had to really think about much later and pull apart. But at the time, I just kind of intuitively did it. And since then, I've talked to other people who have done something similar. And when you think about it, a lot of people who are going through a cancer journey, in particular women tend to do this a lot. But they'll buy the shoes with the pointy spikes, the shoes with the really super high heels, and they'll wear those to chemo. And the idea behind that is, I'm kicking cancer's ass, right?
Right.
But I wanted a much more gentle way of going through the chemo process. And so for me, then I also dressed as though I was traveling in Italy. So what other people have done then is you could wear those shoes, but some people have told me that they have dressed up like they're going to Hawaii, let's say, and they wear the Hawaiian lei and the Hawaiian shirt, and they just bring that element of fun into a really challenging experience. And what that does is it's really quite powerful, because you end up embracing the moments that you're in that are really challenging. And rather than resisting them, you're finding a way to essentially just make the best of it in the most beautiful way possible.
I think whenever we go through a lot of different situations, that the one thing we have a choice over, we don't always have a choice over, the side effects we may get from medicine, or what crazy things people might say to us and all those things, but we do have a choice with our attitude. And I love your attitude, the way you described it as, I might be going to something terrible, but in my head, I'm laying back in the chair. I'm, have a flight attendant bringing me a cocktail, and I'm headed off to, this destination that I've always wanted to do because, prior to being diagnosed with cancer, that was your plan in life, to be able to travel and do those things. And you weren't going to let a diagnosis, an incurable diagnosis, as you were told, stop you from doing something like this. And so, you kept on with your life plans. You might have not physically been in Italy at the moment, but mentally, when you checked out, as you were going through everything, that's how you chose to deal with this situation. And that's the attitude that you wanted to have, instead of, the negative attitude and stuff. And I think lots of times that we either need to be taught or reminded things. And for those listening now, if you're going through chemo, and look, there's times where you dread it. I know that. I know it myself. Whenever you're dry heaving on the way to get your chemo, depending on which type of chemo you're getting, there's moments where obviously you don't want to be there and stuff, but we still have the attitude to choose how we're going to display everything that's happening with our tone, with our actions. And I think that's what really speaks volumes about you and about, people out there that go through this. And I'm sure you've had this, people say this to you as well. I think you mentioned to me before, but as you were going through it, people ask you, like, they wouldn't even, they couldn't even tell that you actually were having chemo because of your attitude, because of the positivity. And I think that gives a lot of people hope that they may or may not express to you. But I know in my situation that you just see the look in people's eyes where, okay, not everybody that has cancer, looks horrible and dies immediately, kind of thing. And that's what I love about your story, is I love that the fact that you physically, and mentally chose to really check out and go a different place, because that's what you knew was your happy place to get you through going through this difficult time. And I know you talk about this in your book as well, but can you just list the 3 steps as far as your 3-step process? And when people want to go into more detail, they can check out your book.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that. The first step to what I call the adventure principle is, first of all, to pay attention to that longing that you have. And I have to kind of backtrack here because, for me, I had this intense longing to escape. Like, as you can appreciate it, I had envisioned this life of travel, and life had sent me this cruel twist of fate where I was grounded and didn't have the health or the wealth to make travel happen. And so I had this intense longing of just wanting to pack my bags, jump on a plane, and go somewhere where I could just lose myself again and fall in love with life. But I couldn't. And so what most people do, or most people, I should say, when they have a health challenge, have that longing that comes up, especially if they love to travel. But it's one of the first things that most people have then is just this longing to escape and just lie somewhere, let's say on a beach in the Caribbean with a fruity drink and, and just, imagine that your troubles are far away, like oceans away from you. And so what I recommend then in this 3-step process is to pay attention to that longing to escape, because it's telling you something very important. And instead of pushing it down and resisting it and saying it's too painful because I don't have the health or I don't have the wealth to make it happen, but allow it to be. And also don't postpone adventure. Don't say, well, when I'm done chemo and radiation, when I'm on the other side of this thing called cancer, then I'm going to, let's say, climb Machu Picchu or something. It's important to give yourself the gift of adventure now. And so the second step then is to make the decision that you're going to make the very best of your challenge. And your challenge is then, especially if you're on a cancer journey, is with chemo or radiation or recovery from surgery, because all of that can be extremely trying. And so once you decide that you're going to make the best of it, your brain then starts to kick into a different gear. And it starts to look for ways, creative ways, that you can actually make the best of it. And then the third step is to ask yourself the question, what can I do to create an adventure out of this challenge that I'm going through? And, to use my example, you could take those moments where you're going through treatment and you can furnish them in beautiful ways. Whatever your wish list is, whatever place you'd love to travel to, you can bring in those feelings of travel into those experiences of chemo, radiation, or post-surgery, and just kind of embody it with how you dress, with the little activities that you enjoy. You could load up a playlist on your device of music that reminds you of a place that you'd love to travel to. And that will help you to really step into the experience of having an adventure, even in the midst of your challenge.
Absolutely. I love it. I wrote it down. So just to reiterate your points for everyone listening, the first step was to pay attention, to be aware, to be kind of intentional of what that is inside of you that maybe you've pushed down, that you've been longing for. Step 2 is to make a decision, to actually act upon that and to try to make that happen. And 3 is to create an adventure. And whether it's going through the chemo or whatever you're going through, create an adventure where you're dressing the part, you're thinking the part, and you're really using that to move forward through some of the toughest times in your life. What were you fighting for? Or what were you, choosing to make this positive realization for? Was it yourself? Was it your family? Or what is it that I guess is your main motivational factor of why you decided to do all of this?
Yeah, I would say, I guess it sounds really selfish, but it was mostly for me, because I knew that my kids had their own lives to live. And if I chose to do anything for them, I would be really pissed off because they would go their own way. They're at that point where they're making their own lives, and they were going to leave me in the dust, so to speak, where I'd have to choose to make my own life. So the biggest motivation was to furnish and pave the way for me to live a beautiful life. And that was my biggest motivation. And it's difficult to say because we're so conditioned to, being altruistic or answering that question in a different way, saying I did it for my kids or I did it for my husband or whatever. So even as I say that, there's a bit of, what do you call that? Reservation, I guess, with saying, I did it for me. But it's true.
No, I think, and again, everyone's got a different opinion on this, which is amazing because we're all different anyways. So, what works for some doesn't work for others, and there's a different recipe for success for everyone. And I've always thought that if I don't take care of myself, how am I going to take care of my wife or something along those lines as well too. So I've spoken to people in the past who, their main motivation was doing it for their children who were young, and then wanted to, make sure they did everything they could to stay alive, to see the rest of their lives and stuff. But in your situation, you have grown children, so it's completely different. So you're an entrepreneur, you have a lot that you wanted to accomplish. So this is one of those things where, as your children are grown, they've learned a lot already, but I'm sure they can look back at you and take, how you approach this and use it as motivation for maybe a challenge going to come up in their life, in their future. Have you got any kind of feedback from your kids as far as how you went through this and, your perception on just how you dealt with the whole diagnosis?
Well, it's kind of nice, Truett, because, they always talk about me as being a badass. And I never thought of myself in that way, but that's what they're proud of, that I essentially did it my way.
Yeah, and as a parent, that's what you've taught them. You've taught them to be aggressive and to fight a challenge head on and to attack it with positivity. And even your approach was gentle, but you're still attacking it at the same time with your way of dealing with it, which, your way works for you. And you dug deep inside to figure all that out, which is so powerful. And you executed on it as well too. Like, you didn't give up. Every moment you said were some, back in the treatment centers were some of your best moments. And that's not a way that a lot of people look at it. So I think that's so strong and so powerful. So catch us up now. Like, how, that was several years ago. Tell us like what went on through the rest of your treatment and where you are currently today.
Yeah, post-cancer, I would say, were some of the most challenging moments, just because, first of all, I'd pushed down a traumatic event for 30 years, and now cancer was a way of making me face all that. So after the treatment was over, then there was just an avalanche of tears, and I could not stop them, even in the most, public of places. And, so I would stress, for the people who are going through a cancer journey, that one of the most important things you can do is also address the emotional piece of a cancer journey. Because so often we put so much focus on the physical aspects without really looking at the emotional. And then, once I was able to move past that, and I got some help with emotional release techniques and was able to move past a lot of trauma in my life. And so, one of the biggest highlights then was since that turbulent time, I would say within a year and a half, I was able to make some travel dreams come true, which I would attribute kind of a natural consequence of using this adventure principle thing, because it helped me to essentially step into the experience of traveling on a day-to-day basis. So since that time, I climbed Machu Picchu with my adult son and went to Bali, Thailand, Cambodia for 3.5 months, where I started to write my book. And then further to that, I went to Ireland and spent 6 months in San Diego. And essentially, in a nutshell, I really just live my life as though I'm traveling every day.
Your incurable cancer. How many years were you diagnosed with incurable cancer?
That was almost to the day in the fall of 2013. Okay. So 5 years ago, almost to the day.
So here we are 5 years ago. Are you cancer free? What's going on? What's your current diagnosis?
100% completely cancer free.
So amazing. And I talked to a guy recently, and one of his biggest pieces of advice was to take control of your own treatment, which I think is what you did. And again, there's a different recipe of success for everyone, but you took control of this whole thing, and it's led you to so many great things in your life. And here you are 5 years later. Have you had a chance to tell that doctor that that you don't have cancer anymore yet?
No, but one of the things on my wish list is to go back to her with my book, dress up like a superstar and just really say thank you to her. Because at the time it didn't feel like it. At the time all these swear words came out of me towards her. But she really gave me a gift, because if she would have held my hand and, let's say, looked lovingly into my eyes and said, sweetie, you're not going to make it, I probably would have looked back at her and said, no shit, you're kidding, Like I probably would have believed her. But she lit a fire underneath me that was so big that really was the fuel that moved me forward. So without even knowing it, she really gave me a gift.
Love it. And I feel this way about so many things. I feel like, God puts so many things in our lives and people, and it may be completely opposite of what you think that you need to hear or whatever at the time. But that's, that whole statement that she made to you really motivated and was a catalyst for everything to, kind of accomplish going forward, because it really put everything in perspective for you. And the way she said it to you was exactly what, maybe you didn't think you needed to hear, but you needed to hear looking back on it, which I think is so amazing to me. And that to me stands out as a 1% moment for you as well too, where that specific sentence of hers just really led you into all these amazing things that you've been able to accomplish and places you've been able to visit, and all these adventures that you've been on. Actually, I had a chance to go on once you've completed all your treatment and stuff. So as a final piece of advice for people, what piece of advice do you give someone maybe listening right now who hasn't got to that point yet where they're looking at life positively, or they're looking at their cancer situation in a positive way yet? What piece of advice would you give them moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I'm not 100% for positivity, if that makes any sense. Because when you're trying to be positive about a really negative situation, it's still negative. And so I don't want to take anything away from anybody, but it's so important to really just come to grips with where you're at, because sometimes, or so often I should say, when people are forced to be positive in a situation like that, they tend to just gloss over what's really unfolding. And it's important to come to terms with it. And that's what I feel I've done with this thing called the adventure principle, because it was just looking realistically at the things I would have to go through that were really challenging and saying, okay, this sucks, people are throwing up around me, and I know it's not going to be a walk in the park, but what can I do to furnish these moments in a beautiful way? So that's what I hope I can leave with your listeners, is that they start to just look at what they have to go through with chemo, radiation, or surgery, and just be open to finding a new way to look at it.
Don't accept the narrative that you may have heard with any kind of media source or anything that you might have known in the past. Like, as you go through a situation, like, make it truly your own. And, don't accept the fact that everyone dies from this, or this is going to be negative. Or anytime I give advice, I have a neighbor now who's got diagnosed with the exact same cancer that I have, my next door neighbor. And Yeah, I'll tell him, I was like, look, there's going to be rough moments, but your attitude every day is going to determine how you get through this. And I see him up early in the morning, walking around the neighborhood on the moments that he can. And then in the evening time as well too. And still going out with his friends and still doing all these different things. And instead of sitting in the house and being miserable the entire time, thinking he's going to die the whole time. So I see all these actions in place that he's doing because he's choosing to attack this a very different way, or choosing to experience, I would say, this point in his life in a very, helpful and strong way for himself, because he knows that's what it takes, is every day a commitment to yourself that you're going to push through this. You're going to, go wherever you got to go mentally to get to the right point where you can give yourself mentally the best chance to help physically your body heal itself. So I absolutely love that advice. And again, your book that you have out now, the Passport to Life book, I know people can catch it on the audiobook on Amazon. And if you sign up with Audible, you can get your first couple of downloads for free and stuff. So everyone check audible.com out and search the Passport to Life book by Annie Poole, and you'll have a chance to really dig in deep to a lot of things that we talked about with the adventure principle, the 3-step process that she mentioned earlier. It's truly wonderful time for you to listen to it while you're in the car or while you're sitting there getting a treatment. I think it's an amazing journey that she'll take you on and help you, get through your current circumstance. So Annie, I thank you for being a guest on the show today. I like to end each episode where I ask the guests a couple of quick personal questions. We've heard about your story and we've heard about, some deeper moments in your life. So I want to kind of bring it up to the surface a little bit and go over just a couple of personal questions that I have for you. So at this point in your life, 5 years being cancer free coming up this month, the next few days, tell us 2 things right now that motivate you and to keep pushing forward each day in your life.
2 things that motivate me, Truett, are social dancing. So I'm a Latin and a ballroom dancer. And the second thing is music. I think I begin and end every day with music.
Social dancing. I love that. That's the first time I've heard. So you said do ballroom dancing and what else?
Latin dancing.
Okay. But that's probably some good cardio exercise for you too, right?
Yeah, I exercise in heels.
Yeah. What's the last book you've read?
Bella Figura. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I haven't.
I think the subtitle is Live, Love, and Eat Like an Italian or something like that.
And what's your favorite recipe or food?
No, actually, it's Indian. It's a mango banana lassi. That's just amazing. You could find a recipe on the internet. It's made with turmeric and mango and yogurt and ginger.
I'll jot that down and check it out.
Yeah.
All right. So what are 3 items that you have on your bucket or life list going forward that you want to accomplish?
Okay. One's really personal. I want to get married in Ireland. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I want to take my kids on a dance cruise. And number 3 is I want to flamenco dance in Seville, Spain.
Love it. Very specific and very measurable for you. I think those are all 3 things that you can definitely accomplish. You put a timetable to all these yet? I know you can't really put a timetable to the first one, but maybe the other 2.
Well, because I need a man, and that hasn't materialized yet. So
you're going to meet him on a trip one day. There you go. They're going to put that out there, and you can think about that. Someone who loves to travel just as much as you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Annie, again, I enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm excited about your future. I'm excited about your book, Passport to Life, on Amazon. I'm going to post several links to some of the things that you have mentioned. I'll post a link to your book. We'll talk about the adventure principle a little bit on the show notes description that I'm going to have posted for you. And if people want to get in touch with Annie, you can email her at transformyourtravel@gmail.com. And Annie, again, I enjoyed checking in with you. Thank you for being a guest on the 1% podcast. And we will check up with you soon, okay?
Thank you so much, Truett. It was a real pleasure.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.